Welcome back to the Health Revival Show. Today we have Amber Romaniuk. She is an emotional eating, digestive, and hormone expert with 11 years experience, helping high-achieving women create a level of body confidence, intuition, and optimal health through powerful mindset healing, self-care, and overcoming self-sabotage with food. Ooh, I love that. Self-sabotage with food. High-achieving women. More and more women, I would tell you, that we have met that are high-achieving. This is a big problem. It's a comfort. It's a stress relief, right?
Yeah.
Thankfully, I've overcome those demons in my life, Becca as well, but we both struggled. So we're super pumped for this conversation. Welcome to the show, Amber. Just tell the world your story and how you got into this. We'd love to know all the details.
Well, thank you for having me, ladies. I absolutely admire what you're both doing as well, because it's so needed in the world. So yeah, this journey, I had to go through myself as well before getting to this point of realizing it was my purpose. And for me, it started at a really young age. I think we all have experiences that build up to this body dysmorphia, binge eating, emotional eating, whatever it is that we end up going through. And for me, it was when I was 5, it was my first day on the school bus. And I got on the bus and the older boys called me fat and ugly. And then the whole bus started making fun of me and it just crushed my soul. And I believed it. And I, thought they were, they don't know me, so it must be true. So I took on the identity of fat and ugly for the next 20 years of my life, became very shy, very insecure in my body. I didn't know how to brush that kind of comment off at 5. I didn't feel inspired to tell my parents. They were struggling with their own stuff. My mom was diagnosed with MS before I was born. That was a whole experience I can't imagine in itself. And so then having a young daughter and them trying to deal with that, I'm sure was just so much. And so I just felt like I had to just deal with things myself. So I kept a lot to myself. I didn't want to be a burden. And that is a mentality that I think a lot of women take on. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to bother anyone. I'll just do it myself, be independent. But then we end up taking on the weight of the world. And it's very overwhelming and stressful. And then, of course, we start creating these unhealthy coping mechanisms. And so, I always use food as a coping mechanism unconsciously through my childhood, my tweens, my teens. My mom and I always did everything with food because it was a way for her to compensate for all the things we couldn't do together, because it would flare up her symptoms. She'd get dizzy, her limbs would go numb. I think she felt a lot of guilt. Even though I would never get upset with her, it was a very, emotional dynamic witnessing her decline. And I think being the only child and witnessing your mother's decline and having no control, you feel helpless. And I think I really used food as a coping mechanism to cope with that witnessing of this woman I idolized just completely slowly losing control. And so I think a lot of that really created the behaviors. I just didn't know I was emotionally eating. And there was always a lot of processed food and sugar and junk at home because my mom was a food addict. I just didn't know until I healed and reflected back on her behaviors. And so into the teens, you get conditioned to be critical of your body. You start reading the magazines, right? All the photoshopping, the editing, everything is fake, but we think it's real. And we start comparing ourselves and going, what's wrong with me that I don't look like that? So there comes the body dysmorphia. And then, of course, we're sold the solution, which is you diet. You have to just eat less and exercise more, and that will fix everything and you'll finally be happy. And that is literally the narrative that we're programmed into from elementary school and onward. And so I was just either dieting or losing control with food. And I really came into my binge struggles where it was very relevant in my early 20s. So I'd had my first real breakup, couldn't eat, going to the gym, losing weight really fast, thought it was great, really fed my ego. And then my period disappeared and nothing was getting better. And losing all the weight was not making me happy or fixing anything like you convince yourself it will. And it's like this switch flipped. And one day I went to a barbecue, had ice cream cake, stole the chocolate bar off the counter that was for the s'mores that we are going to make around the fire later, went into the bathroom, ate it, left the party, got fast food on the way home, binged until I was so full I was sick, and then thus fueled the cycle of binge eating and then trying to compensate and punish by going to the gym and work it all off and restrict and skip meals or diet and eat very little, which then would trigger the binge and the loss of control and the back and forth over and over again. So now I gained about 80 pounds in 4 months, was the heaviest that I'd ever been. And binge eating for me wasn't just eating a half a bag of chips. It was eating until I was so full I was sick. And that's where my bio, I'm not lying, where I said I lost and gained over 1,000 pounds in 5 years and spent $50,000 on binge food and quick fixes because I was at the organic store trying to justify why it's a bit healthier if I'm buying it at the organic store. No, not when you're eating that amount, and spending 70 to $80 5 or 6 nights a week adds up really quickly. Hired personal trainers I couldn't afford because I thought that would fix me and make me accountable. Buying smaller clothes to try and think, well, if this, I can use these as motivators, right? To get thinner and gain control of food. None of that worked. And then I had my low point moment a couple years later after going through a lot of binging, a cycle of binging and purging, and just really starting to become actually aware of what I was doing. It's like, wow, okay, I know this is a behavior of binge eating. I'm emotionally eating. I don't know how to cope, but I wasn't ready to deal with it. And I think that's one of the biggest hangups for so many people and so many women is we're like, oh my gosh, how am I even going to deal with this? Where do I start? I have to actually deal with my emotional baggage. I have to deal with my unworthiness. I have to deal with that I'm afraid to feel my emotions. I am numbing everything out. That is uncomfortable. And that is terrifying to your fight or flight center of the brain, the amygdala. And we want to stay in our comfort zone. So I was in this denial that it wasn't a big deal and that, food is my friend and it's my thing. And I really like my inner critic convinced me it wasn't a big deal until I had my low point moment, which is where I would always throw the food in the garbage. And that was the motivator to not go and dig through the garbage. And that particular night, I'd finished a binge, thrown the food away, was sitting on the couch in immense pain and crying, just thinking, like, I don't know how I'm ever going to change this. How did this become my life? I'm afraid I'm not going to make it to 30 because I was only 22 at the time. And then I got some room in my digestive system. And I'm like, oh, if this is the last time I'm going to do this, the all or nothing mentality, I might as well go eat the cookies. And so I went into the kitchen, pulled out my little blue garbage, dug through, ate the cookies, just sat on the floor in absolute shame and embarrassment, and just thought, I just ate out of a garbage. Like, how did this become my life? But it's what I needed to crush the fear of change, the fear of the unknown, to crush the denial. I'm like, this is a big deal. This isn't just a little thing. I've got to figure out how to deal with this. And that really took me on the journey of healing, of learning about food and the way it was impacting my gut flora and my digestive system, and that sugar is 10 times more addictive than cocaine. And I'm eating these ingredients that are giving me huge drug like highs. And then discovering I don't love myself, that I hate my body, and I'm chasing the number on the scale. My worth is tied to that number. I'm afraid to feel. I don't have healthy ways to cope. I suck at coping with stress. Like learning all these levels of why I was behaving the way I was, I don't know what's triggering me. How am I supposed to change this if I have no idea what's triggering me to binge? So that really, you know, flowed me through this journey for a couple of years of self-discovery and learning all these things. I did this journey by myself. I didn't get help. I couldn't afford it at the time. But now I see why I had to go through myself, because it was going to be setting me up for the work that I started 11 and a half years ago. But I healed it, and it was liberating to heal that and learn body awareness and learn about my health and well-being on a physical, mental, emotional, energetic level. And then to start to have women asking questions and noticing the shift, and then having it land that this is why I'm here. I have the brain of this recovered addict that's been through all these levels of emotional eating and binge eating. I know how to help women. And that's what really birthed the business and has led up to this point.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think a lot more people deal with it than we want to believe and we want to think.
Yeah.
I was I was the same way. I ate out of the garbage. I would eat in private. I would, when my, now husband would leave the room, I would go to the pantry and like shove as much food in my mouth as
Hmm.
possible. And I was training and working out a ton, and so like I justified it because
Yeah.
I was like, I'm competing. I need the calories, right? Um, and it's just such a vicious cycle. And I love that you said addictive behavior, because it is. I mean,
Hmm.
like that's what the psychosocial, you know, it's addiction.
Hmm.
And we only think, I think sometimes of addiction in terms of like alcohol and drugs
Yeah.
and, the addictions that can be really, really harmful. This is no different.
No.
Um, and once you start to kind of accept or, hit that rock bottom per se, um, changing it's hard.
Hmm.
It is really hard because you have to face, yourself in the mirror, and in my experience, it was a lot of like white knuckling and gritting through showing myself I could do it. So, I think a lot more people deal with it than than we think.
Yeah.
And if you're dealing with it, know that you are not alone. It can feel really lonely.
Mhm.
Um, and you deserve to have freedom from it. And so I think this is going to be really impactful for a lot of people because it doesn't matter the level that you experience it at, right? It doesn't need to be you're eating out of the garbage
No.
or eating until you're sick. Like some people might be. It could be you had a really, really stressful day and you can't help, go into the pantry and eat 3 tablespoons of peanut butter,
Yeah.
it doesn't have, "Oh, you qualify and check the box for the problem," right? It can be any level.
Mhm.
And so, what did you find throughout your journey as kind of big root causes of the binge and emotional eating?
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you said that there's different levels of it because it's true and it doesn't matter what level you're at. And you could be binging or like you said, eating peanut butter, or I went through a phase where I was just eating bags of cashews and like 10 bananas and like I couldn't even have fruit in the house because I was losing control. So it could be healthy food. But what it came down to when I had kind of alleviated all the really processed food and I still wanted to binge was wow, like I have a self-worth issue. I don't love myself. I don't feel good enough. I feel very insecure in who I am as a person and in my body. And I'm trying to fill a void with food that I'm never going to fill with food. And I think when I started to realize that it came down to I don't feel good enough, and that again, I'm afraid to feel. I'm afraid to feel my emotions. And I think a lot of that came from in childhood. Oh, Amber, don't cry. Like everything's fine. Be strong. Or I'd like be hanging out with boys and they'd be like, not that boys are bad, but shut up, like your opinion doesn't matter, don't say anything, right? And so you just okay, like I'm not going to say anything. And so there was not a self-expression. I didn't feel like I could feel because you got to be tough. And so you're holding all this emotion inside, and then it's uncomfortable when it comes up because you don't know what to do with it. And so it's like, okay, I'll just eat, I'll just suppress it. And then the third piece I think is the dopamine high. A lot of us have low dopamine, one of our mood boosting neurotransmitters, and we don't realize it. And then it's so easy to get into addictive or reward like behaviors that are not healthy ones. There's a lot of healthy ways to boost your dopamine, but we're not taught those. It's enabled and encouraged to be like, oh, just eat the pint of ice cream. They make ads about it. The movies where the women are emotionally eating and binge eating, they're enabling it. Look at the competitive eating channels now. Like it's literally like being normalized to overconsume. And so I think that chasing the dopamine high, and I was so addicted to food because my dopamine was so low, and being I didn't know that every time I did it, it was like the bigger high and then the bigger low. And then I was making the levels lower because of all the inflammation and the hormone issues and the gut issues and everything that I was doing to my body. And so I think that the lack of understanding my body and the way this behavior was impacting my brain chemistry, that it was wiring a habit in my brain that every time I sit down in the evening and I binge, I'm literally strengthening that pathway. And even on the nights where I don't want to do it, that pathway is lighting up and it's like, it's time for you to do this. It's time for you to do this. So I knew nothing. And so my lack of knowledge and awareness, I think, was the other thing that kept it going until I really started figuring it out for myself.
I love what you said there, the lack of knowledge and awareness, because I think so many people might be in a cycle right now. Again,
Mhm.
intensity, right? On a
Yeah.
different level here, that they're wiring their brain to do these things. And this could be with alcohol, it could be with drugs, it could be with, again, the ice cream or the cookies or whatever. And then it
Mhm.
just intensifies and intensifies and intensifies over time
Yeah.
because we're not willing to feel.
Yeah.
Right. So we've talked in the past just about mom life, right? And how I think it was last year we did a whole podcast on like mommy juice because everybody was promoting, you know, that it's normal to just go at the margaritas and the wine at 5 p.m. or whatever. And I get it. It's easy to do when you've had a long day at home, if you're on postpartum, leave or whatever, you're just by yourself. But at the same time, like then that does start to, come back, and those thoughts, whether or not it's conscious, it's most of the time not conscious, it's subconscious. So, when we think about triggers, I know in my life, like I can think of, triggers that maybe would set me off to want those things. It could be, again, a stressful day. It could be, you got into an argument with somebody, whatever, you know, set your emotion to make you want to then turn to comfort. What do you see in terms of, some of those really common triggers lead to this cycle outside of the ones we've already
Yeah.
mentioned, right?
Oh
In
my
terms
gosh.
of restricting, because
Yeah,
that's
there's
real.
so many triggers. Each of my clients, I'd say, has at least a dozen triggers or more, and some are like overlapping, very common. Overwhelm is very common, the number on the scale, and it triggering you to be frustrated if it's not changing the way you want it to. Comparison, whether you're the mom comparing yourself to all the other moms on social media that look like they're doing more than you are, even though, right? It's like comparison on social media, comparison in the gym, you're losing weight faster than the other woman in postpartum, like all of that kind of stuff I see all the time. Eating something, the all or nothing mentality. So eating something small, having a mindful indulgence, and then that inner critic is like, you've ruined the day, it's ruined, like you've messed up, screw it, like the day is like a write off, eat whatever you want, try again Monday, right? And there's just either you're trying to be perfect with food or falling off. And so I see the all or nothing across the board is a big trigger. And then we see specific hormone issues like adrenal fatigue. Like I had extremely high cortisol when I was going through all of this, and you have higher appetite level. You have more cravings for sugar and salt and processed carbs. You're not sleeping good. You're tired. Fatigue increases your hunger hormones. It increases the F it, I don't care mentality. So I see a lot of hormone imbalances that can trigger emotional eating and vice versa. And I think the visual trigger of certain foods being in the house and knowing that it's there, right? That can be very tempting, or knowing it's in the office, right? Maybe there's certain things that you don't leave at home, but that are at your workspace. And then I think a big one is, yeah, like negative interactions with others, having conflicts, especially if you're a people pleaser, you don't want conflict. You want everyone to be happy with you. And so you overbook and you overcompensate and then leave nothing for yourself. And if you think about setting a boundary or having a difficult conversation, you get terrified. And then what do? We go to food. So I see many different emotional, mental, physical, and energetic triggers. The last one I'll share for now is the empath trigger. So I'm a sensitive empath. Most of the women that I know are as well, where you're sensitive to energy. You go into a big crowd, it can be draining. You feel a lot of emotions. When you're with a friend and they're venting to you, you take on all their stuff. It's like you over empathize, and then you leave the interaction and you were feeling so good. And now you're like, I'm angry, I'm sad, why? And then we emotionally, because we're uncomfortable, we don't want to feel those emotions. So not knowing how to manage our energy and manage being an empath is another big trigger for women as well. And we're such nurturers, right?
Mhm.
So it's our natural tendency to want to nurture and tend to others, but we then take on things that aren't ours to take on. And that is a lot of emotion to carry on our nervous system.
Yeah.
Would we add there, right? So when you're in a social environment, maybe the peer pressure, you don't want to say no. We were talking about this this past weekend. Like, you don't want to say no to grandma because she made these awesome cookies, pies, whatever. We used to hear this a lot, but I know that that's real because like you don't want to hurt somebody else's feeling. But what I had to learn in my journey and then eventually start to just be blunt about and share is that I'm the one that's suffering. So it's not that I don't want this. I definitely want that. It looks delicious. But also, I have goals and I don't want to be miserable for the next 48, 72 hours because of how it's going to impact me physically, just with my digestion and energy and whatnot. And so I think that there's some of these unexpected triggers too, or what I would have, my clients in the past do is like even think about places, time of the day. We've touched on that a little bit. People that you were around, or lack of, right? So we touched on that. Like, I'm by myself. Nobody's going to know, but right? And that's again where we're trying to break this cycle. So we touched on some of those triggers. What would you say in terms of like the unexpected triggers? Would you have any there to add? Because I think it's really important, going back to what you said before
Mhm.
with the awareness, to bring this to light. So if you are struggling with this,
Yeah.
that you can start to evaluate. Because I think that what I've seen time and time again is that it's the fear of success that holds people back. And so they self sabotage when they're getting towards their goal or they had a good week. This was me. I was totally a self sabotager. If I got on the scale and it moved, I lost 4 pounds because I went basically 1,000 calories Monday through Thursday. Sweet. I get to celebrate this weekend, all my hard work, or vice versa. You mentioned that before
Yeah.
too, like
Oh my
not going
gosh.
in the right direction. So the effort mentality, why does this matter? So I always called it like the Monday mindset. But until I had that awareness of what was actually going on and what those triggers were, I couldn't change because I couldn't get ahead of it.
100%. No, I totally agree. So I think there are unexpected triggers. And I think part of it is around like the time of year. like I had healed binge eating, but then when Thanksgiving came around, all of a sudden I wanted to binge and I'm like, why? And I'm like, oh, it's these limited edition things. It's this literal holiday pathway that will only light up this certain time of year that I have to work on dismantling. It's certain places like going to visit my parents. It was the last habit pattern that I had to dismantle with binge eating because the pathway only lights up when you're in the environment or with a certain people that you've associated the behavior with. So I think it's starting to become aware of that kind of thing. And I think it's also becoming aware of like, what are the first signs that you're triggered? Because most women are not aware of that. And how are you going to catch it if you are not aware of the first signs? And that is your first awareness builder. What does it feel like in my body before I want to go to food? Do I have a tightness in my chest and not in my stomach? Bloating is a big trigger, especially if you didn't eat anything that to make you bloated. That happened to me for a while. I was like eating really clean and I'm like, oh, it's great. And then I just randomly would get bloated. And I didn't know it was my emotions that were triggering it yet until, you learn how much your emotions are stored in the gut. And I get so angry and I'm like, I didn't even eat anything and I'm bloated. So screw it. I'm already bloated. I might as well binge. Right. So like that would trigger me, or physical symptoms. I would get so angry at my body rather than breathing and getting curious and going, why is my body talking to me? This is a symptom. What is she trying to say? And obviously I learned that as I went, but I just had so much anger and like resentment toward my body. And I think that when you get easily triggered by your body not working the way you want her to, even though you're treating her like a garbage can, right? It's just so easy to go into that triggering behavior. So being aware of the first signs of physical sensations, what are the first thoughts that I'm having? That's really important. And I think also knowing the difference between physical and emotional hunger. Many women do not know what physical hunger is. And it's because half of them aren't having a hunger signal, either because they have a thyroid issue they don't know about, their digestive system isn't functioning properly, their hunger hormones aren't firing properly. But they're just told, oh, you're not hungry. How convenient. Just don't eat. And so it's just like backfiring and making it worse and suppressing their metabolism and everything else. So they're confused about what hungry and full feel like. So that's going on for a pool of women. So it's easier to just keep eating. And then there's the pool of women that are so busy they're not stopping to go, oh, wow, I'm ravenous. And then their blood sugar is crashing to the level where they're like faint, pale, shaky, about to pass out. And then we panic and grab the first thing we can eat, which then triggers all or nothing. And then it's about really getting to the point of like, okay, I do get a hunger signal. I'm hungry or my stomach's growling. I haven't eaten in a few hours. Ooh, my blood sugar is starting to drop off. It's time to eat, and actually being willing to sit and eat mindfully. And even if you just have to turn away from your computer without distraction and focus on that and learn what fullness feels like and be present with your food, like these are all things that you can start building awareness with now that are going to help you. But 90% of the time, it is emotional hunger for women, and they know, and they're like, I don't care. I just want the food. And it's because of the overwhelm, the overbooked, don't want to feel it's too uncomfortable. I just need 5 minutes, and this is my 5 minute checkout. Right. And that's where we have to really deal with the calendar and the lack of self prioritization, which is a self worth issue.
Yeah. Let's expand on that because you talk, obviously, we've mentioned self worth more than a couple of times, um, and how self worth, we see this come up with, whether it's binge, restrict, emotional eating, just not, because I think a lot of women think that they do an okay job with this, but our habits maybe speak otherwise. Our life, our routine, we put way too much on our plates. Liz and I are both moms, of little ones that require a lot of us, a business that requires a lot of us. And we do all the things we can. And sometimes it's not enough, and we can't just keep adding to your plate. Because whether you think you're, treating your body, your mind right, if you're struggling with this stuff, a lot of times people say, like you said, like numb out. I want to I don't want to feel like I don't want to think. And we justify it with that, so I'd love for you to talk about self-worth and what you see in terms of maybe telltale signs of this or, what you see in
Mhm.
the area of how it drives it.
Yeah. And I think starting to pay attention to the self talk. I'm not good enough. I'm stupid. I didn't do a good enough job. I can't believe I couldn't be perfect this week with food. I, I ate well and I exercised and the number didn't drop. Like, I feel guilty thinking about taking 20 minutes away from my kids, the mom guilt kicking in. I don't deserve to take the time, right? I'm not worthy of the success of fully healing this. So I gained some traction. I'm going to go self-sabotage and reward myself. But it is a lot of the like, it's not enough. I'm not enough. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough friends. I'm not getting enough validation, right? I find to maybe not so much what someone's saying, but the way that they're going to behave when we're not feeling good enough is we will people please. And it's like in our heart of biggest hearts, we want to say no, but then we say yes out of the, oh, but I really need that person to tell me I'm good enough today because I'm not feeling it myself. And so then we're like literally giving our power away and giving our power to someone else and what they think of us, which is so disempowering for us because if we decide to say no, right, to others and yes to ourselves, it's very terrifying because we think, well, I'm not going to get that validation and I need that to feel good today. So I think it really is putting too much reliance on external things, whether it's numbers or clothing size, how well we ate or didn't eat today, what other people think of us, what your social media followers think of you versus like, no, what I think of myself. The other piece that I see a lot, and I'm sure you guys can attest to this, is I'm not good enough if I'm not busy. If I rest, I'm lazy. I have to feel guilty. I have to feel bad, shame on me for resting and slowing down versus I'm just as worthy and just as good of a woman if I rest, if I take a nap, if I do self care, or if I, check 6 things off my to do list today. But we have tied and ingrained our worth up into all these external habits and circumstances versus realizing in any moment we're worthy. You're born unconditionally loving yourself and worthy. And then we get programmed from age 0 to 7 based on our upbringing, our family, what we learn and perceive in society, school, our friends. And that creates these limiting beliefs in our belief systems and behaviors. And if your family told you you're selfish and you're not a good person if you put yourself first, you put your family first. It's innocent, it's not their fault, but these are the kinds of things that will create this void, and then we are forever trying to fill it with external things and we never claim that worth, and that's why the internal work is the key and is the answer.
We have a close friend, Roxy, and this is like the main thing she always talks about is like the relationship with you is the most important relationship you'll ever have because it's the only relationship that's going to be with you your entire existence, right? And I heard a great quote this morning that I feel like it needs to be seared into my brain, but it was people are going to dislike you whether you are trying to be a version of yourself that you think they'll like or if you're trying to be yourself. Like someone out there is going to dislike either of them. And so you might as well be a version of yourself that you approve of and that you feel good with and that sits in,
Hmm.
right? Like
Yes.
because you're never going to please everyone.
No.
But at the end of the day, if you can please this and you can have that relationship with you that is, it just feels right to your soul and your heart,
Hmm.
you can conquer anything
Yeah.
because then you're never lying to anyone. And I've been that in the past where I've
Oh yeah.
tried to like, be someone that I thought everyone would like, and it felt so disingenuous, and it ended up being a worse situation at the end of it because I never felt true to me.
Hmm.
And so, I think that self-worth piece is the hardest piece
Yeah.
because this relationship with us and with who we are and who we, like you said, we create these pathways.
Yeah.
And the bigger story you tell, the more ingrained and difficult it is to uncreate, right?
Yeah.
And to rewrite. So I would love for you to talk a little bit in terms of like, how you get started with that with your clients. How do you even begin to approach someone that is just they've created such like a battered, broken down version of them really probably with their own thoughts
Yeah.
ultimately. So where do you begin with that?
Yeah. This is the biggest piece. And it's starting to help them build awareness of what I call the ego mind, the inner critic. And we all have one, and it's going to be there. And it's actually a teacher when you start to do your healing and recognize when you're triggered, and your triggers are what are going to help you dismantle these parts of you that just aren't in alignment. So your emotional eating triggers or whatever triggers your inner critic are just trying to show you where you are not in alignment with yourself, or you haven't healed something. And so what I do with my clients is first off, it's like, okay, I want to teach you what it feels like when you give your power away to your ego versus when you're in your power. So when your ego's in control, it's yelling at you, it's negative, it's telling you you're not doing a good enough job, it's telling you go eat the thing, and then it's like, I can't believe you ate that again, you have no willpower and you suck, your weight isn't good enough, you're not good enough, you're not doing good enough, fear, lack, anger, worry, like all of it. And yeah, we're meant to feel a wide array of emotions, but the ego is not meant to run the show. The ego is the part of you, it's like, you can't set a boundary, you can't say no. What if you upset somebody? Right? Oh, you're not deserving of this success, or oh my gosh, it's too scary or daunting to heal your relationship with food or start a business or whatever the things are. And you're going to feel like the tightness in your chest. Your breathing is going to be shallower. You're going to have a knot in your stomach. You're going to feel contracted, tight. Your shoulders are going to be up. These are signs you've given your power away, an energy drain, right? Versus when you're in your power, you catch the negative, you can go into positive self-talk, you can forgive yourself, you start to pause before you go to the food, and you actually take responsibility and look at, why am I wanting to do this, right? You set a boundary even if it's uncomfortable, you say no or ask for help in the beginning even though it's uncomfortable, you start taking small steps toward 5 minutes of self-care, 10 minutes of self-care for yourself. And even though there's discomfort in your ego screaming at you to not, you acknowledge it, but you move forth and do it anyway. And so I really teach my clients this awareness first, because it is literally what is calling the shots and running the show for them. And when they realize the inner critic, the ego mind, is not the true them, and the true them is this like courageous part of them that has always been there, that they're now rediscovering for themselves. It's part of what inspires and motivates them to want to get further on the journey, because they're like, wow, I said no and the world didn't blow up, and oh my gosh, I took 10 minutes and like my house didn't crack in half and I didn't fall into the basement. Like we literally think the worst case scenario when it comes to the ego to convince us to avoid doing the things that are actually going to get us where we want to go. But it boosts your confidence and your excitement when you do it the first time. And even when you do it the 50th time, because you're like, wow, I'm doing this. And then we just go deeper. And what is the ego? It's your wounded inner child who was bullied in school, who was told to shut up, who wasn't given attention, who was told, oh, a B plus. Yeah, no, get the A plus, right? Who wasn't validated, who got your book taken out of your hand and told it's time to go to bed and you took it the wrong way. It could have been the littlest experience or the biggest trauma that you went through that is literally wounded inside of you, that is dictating the way this inner critic is running the show. So I do a lot of inner child work with my clients, but the ego work is huge, and it's baby steps. It's not quickly, it's done at the pace that feels good for the client and for the nervous system. That is really the key here. We're literally dismantling years and decades of habits, beliefs, and behaviors. So we have to be patient, and we need to not rush it. Otherwise, it just stresses everything out.
Yeah, one of the things that we've talked about over the years with clients is that it's not just going to be an overnight change, right? You're going to have times where you still go back and, maybe it's less frequent, less intense, but, you will still, because again, you're battling years and years. Like nobody is going to be perfect with just saying like cold turkey, most of the time, right? Because exactly what you said before, there could also be those places that become triggers, the times of the year, a vacation, a childhood memory that inflicts. I actually, right now for me personally, I think of Girl Scout season time. Like I was the #1 Girl Scout cookie seller and was like all into it for so many years. And we had so many boxes of Girl Scout cookies, and I loved the Thin Mints, right? The freezer Thin Mints. And I go and have several of those. And, sometimes it's like, okay, that can still be triggering. Not anymore because they're full of glyphosate and heavy metals. But, there's so many things that can arise. And maybe it's that time that you thought that you were doing so good, but now it's like a next level hurdle that you have to conquer. So just for those of you out there, I think, knowing that this healing work, exactly as you mentioned, it does take time, and it's okay if you're not perfect. You will
Hmm.
have ups. But
Yeah.
I always tell, my clients, and I'm sure you do too, let's learn from it. Let's unpack,
Yes.
what led up to that event. And it's not just the day or a couple hours before, it can be 2, 3, for a week, leading up to it, because there can be anticipation
Hmm.
or there can be a build up, right? So
Yeah.
like I always would think about my stress eating or the weekend binges. I was living also for Monday. Like in corporate world, I didn't like what I was doing. So, excuse me, I was living for the weekends
Hmm.
and then was starting over again on Monday.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I love that you brought that up. Let's talk before we close this out. Let's talk about hormones.
Hmm.
Because you kind of mentioned this, and I love that you touched on like the hunger hormones too. Obviously, we know with the female cycle, we can of course have cravings at certain times in the month. But I love that you talked about you don't even know the difference between emotional and physical because we've either suppressed or we've ignored these things or we just can't tune into it. The way I say it, and I'm
Hmm.
curious what you say, would you eat a salad or would you eat an apple compared to the ice cream that you are so hungry for? you know,
Hmm.
let's
Yeah.
define that a little bit more from the hormone perspective.
Yeah, 100%. So, yeah, what I see is a lot of women are dealing with undetected thyroid issues. So they're hypothyroid mostly and or Hashimoto's as well, the autoimmune, and they're lacking a hunger signal because their metabolism is suppressed because their thyroid is suppressed. So it's really causing issues with the body being able to produce ghrelin and give us that stomach growl. And then what's tied to that is that cortisol, that stress hormone. So I often find if women have a thyroid issue, they have an adrenal issue and their stress hormones are off. And if we're in these habits and behaviors of stress eating, overbooked, all these things, you ladies probably have never had a client without a cortisol issue because I've never seen it. So it's like your stress hormones up and then you're overstimulated and it can be more difficult for the brain to communicate with the stomach and make you hungry, give you a clear hunger signal, a clear full signal. And or if you're always multitasking and eating, you're never going to know what true hunger and true fullness feel like, and you're probably going to end up too full and you're going to wait too long to eat. And most of the women that I work with are chronic dieters. They're restricting, they're under eating, and now we have the whole Ozempic epidemic and all of these drugs that are being, in my opinion, abused and not used properly for the right things. And that's just totally skewing things to a whole different level. And so when we're chronic dieting, we're under eating, we're over exercising, we're not getting enough sleep. This throws the thyroid function and the cortisol off. It throws the progesterone and estrogen off. And then you get to that luteal phase of your cycle. And I find the cravings really ramp up. We do get an increased temporary metabolism boost, and then we are actually more hungry and need to eat a bit more, but that will surge a lot more and be a lot more amplified if you have hormone issues, gut flora issues, candida, right? You're craving more sugar, more chocolate, more processed foods. And if you also have that pattern wired in your brain that when I'm a week away from my cycle, I fully go all out and lose control, that's going to keep lighting up as well. So they all kind of work together. Not necessarily, it's your body's not plotting against you. It's just this is the series of events and imbalances that has been created due to the way that you have been treating your body up until now, whether you've realized what you're doing or not. And so this is why it's so important for us to work on blood sugar regulation, eating regularly through the day, in my opinion, lots of protein and fat with good carbohydrates, fruits, veg, etc. Getting good sleep, good hydration, like starting with basic need foundational habits, and then actually eating mindfully so we can start to pay attention to hunger and fullness. And as you start shifting this, your hunger signal will come back. I know it will. And you'll be very clear on the differences, and that will make it easier for you to catch it. But you've got to get your hormones tested. You've got to get on the proper supports to help that regulate. And then, of course, the last thing is what's fueling the hormone issues, the self-worth stuff, the overbook stuff, like all of that, right? So it's that whole picture that's connecting all of this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the one thing that I think a lot of people struggle with is the need for more self awareness.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and that self awareness to them feels scary, annoying, frustrating, hard.
Yep.
Like I'm sure you've heard this before. I don't want to have to think about what I eat. I don't want to have to focus on like what I'm thinking or how I feel.
Yeah.
It's just too much, right? And
Yeah.
another example of avoidance, another example of, trying to just numb what you don't want to face. And a lot of people I think are using, although I do think that, the GLP-1s could serve a purpose in certain situations of addictive behaviors and helping with those addictive behaviors in terms of like getting a hand up for some people. I agree with you wholeheartedly. They are completely abused. Dosing is completely abused.
Yeah.
People are not using them properly
No.
or safely.
Yeah.
But I think the first step is always awareness.
Yeah.
Like you have to know what your triggers are, and you can't know that unless you're paying attention to what your day to day is and what your
Yeah.
thoughts are,
Yeah.
and whether it is slowing down the meals or journaling in the morning or, having hard conversations, hiring someone,
Mhm.
you therapists, like whoever it is that can help you start to identify, because without identification, there is no change.
No.
You have no idea what to change,
Yeah.
you know? So are there any tactics that you put in place with your clients to start creating this awareness and, acknowledgement of this is what's going on, especially without judgment,
Yeah. 100%.
self and what maybe you've created, because I think a lot of people can have a lot of shame around that. And I think
Hmm.
shame and guilt are two of the worst
Yeah.
human emotions there are.
Oof.
So would love to hear kind of like tactical things you have your clients start to do.
Yeah, 100%. So one of the first things is I get them to into a journal practice for forgiveness, apology and forgiveness exercise. So as they're starting to figure out what's triggering them and build that awareness, it's like I did this. I'm going to apologize to myself because this is what this taught me. I forgive myself because, and knowing what I know now, I'm going to try this different approach next time. And even just that of like going through that helps them clear the shame, the guilt, the embarrassment. And then I say to them, I know that you're carrying the shame, the embarrassment, whatever it is, but can you spend a few minutes just even like breathing it out, or like write it on a piece of paper, rip it up and throw it in the garbage, but just something that's going to symbolize you letting some or all of it go. Right. Because otherwise it can snowball into another trigger. I think again, another thing that I get them to start with right away is this physical or emotional hunger, and getting them to know the differences of that, like we talked about earlier, because 9 times out of 10, they know it's emotional. And then it's like, okay, as soon as you can, get out of the kitchen, get away from the temptation, grab a journal and start writing down, like, why am I triggered? What am I feeling right now? What's been going on this week? And that's part of how they're going to build awareness and help them shift away from the trigger. In our first or second session, rather, I introduce a powerful tool that goes through some key questions. And one of the most important questions they ask themselves in this tool to help them shift away from the trigger is, what does it cost me to keep using food instead of actually dealing with the trigger? What is it costing my physical health, my mental, emotional health, my energetic and spiritual health? Because we could have a whole other conversation about frequency and manifestation, right? My finances, my family, my relationships, my job, my work, my career, my self worth. Like, what is it costing me to keep doing this? And
Mhm.
I'm telling you, when you're being authentic with yourself and you're making that list of costs, it really turns you off of wanting to go and repeat the same habit and pattern. And that's the whole point, is like, I'm going to start taking ownership and responsibility. And this is helping me with that. And then I think the last thing I'll leave you with is start building a self-care practice. Even if you're a novice and you've never done it before, try things like a quick journal prompt, just writing how you're feeling, or 5 things you're grateful for, or what's triggering me right now. 5 minutes of breath, 5 minutes of meditation, get outside for 5 minutes, cuddle your dog or your kid or your spouse for 5 minutes. But it's just like something to pattern interrupt and help you go, okay, I'm going to try this first instead, building a new pathway in the brain, which is part of what's going to help dismantle the old.
I love that. And, the question about cost, I think, is so powerful. We talk a lot about this in terms of, people who are really sick and, maybe not investing, or surprised by that fact that, they need to invest. And, we hear oftentimes, especially here in the United States, well, it's so much more expensive to eat healthy. And it's like, the way that you're looking at it and the way that you're framing this is backwards,
Yeah.
because while you might pay a little bit more to have a higher quality product that's, healthy food, organic, unprocessed, you are also saving yourself in terms of mental, emotional, physical cost.
Yeah.
And I just think, one thing that I've talked a lot about in the past is confidence,
Yeah.
right? Like, how can you eat all this processed food every day in and day out, and have energy and feel good and good digestion and good hormones, to have good libido, to
Yeah.
have clear,
Yeah.
mental focus and clarity to do your job, to be productive, to get a raise, right? Or level up, or whatever it might be. Like, there is a true cost.
Yeah.
And so I love that you brought that up, because I think it's very valuable to evaluate from that standpoint. In this 2 to 3 minutes that I'm
Mhm.
enjoying peanut butter or the Oreos or the Ho-Hos or whatever, that is in turn costing me a good night's sleep, a good sex life, a
Yeah.
career, that I
Yeah.
ultimately want, in terms of, elevating whatever it is, just because there's no chance that your brain can function well on all that. processed food and overload. So this has been amazing, powerful episode. I think so many of our listeners will resonate with this. And so before we go, first and foremost, if you're listening to the show and you found this valuable, please share it. Tag Amber. But where can they tag you? Where can they find you?
Yeah. So on Instagram, it's my name, Amber Romaniuk, Romaniuk. Same with Facebook. I
And
do have the website, which is amberproof.ca. I have a free emotional eating quiz if you're wondering if you're struggling, as well as an intro to an emotional eating workshop you can check out to start building awareness on your own. And you are welcome to reach out for support, type a 30-minute consultation. We can connect via Zoom and explore if going on the journey makes sense.